Hi, and welcome back to aboutmashiach.com. We're going to be looking at humanity's end state in this video, specifically the spiritual identity of humanity at the end of days, how that's going to look like according to the Torah. And this is part of the series of videos about depopulation at the end of days. However, we're going to be taking a bit of a tangent with this video. So the way humanity started is quite in a simple and united way. There was actually a commandment to populate the world. In contrast with depopulation, there was 7 Noahide laws that applied universally to the whole of humanity. 6 of them were commanded to Adam, and then the 7th was commanded to Noah. So that makes the 7 Noahide laws applicable to the whole humanity. And then they also spoke one language. Everybody spoke the same language. So that's quite united. Then started divisions, beginning with the divisions that happened in the time of the generation of the dispersion, a few generations after the flood, that tried to build the Tower of Babylon, and they were dispersed by God throughout the world and divided into 70 nations and 70 languages. And then a few generations after, the children of Israel were chosen to accept and implement the Torah in the world. So again, another separation of that nation from the rest of humanity. And what we want to find out is how is that going to look like at the end of days, in the ultimate Messianic era of Mashiach? How is that going to look like in terms of these divisions? Are they going to subsist? So we're going to still have divisions between nations and between Israel, or are they going to converge and become one like it was before? So to do that, we'll first see how the Torah looks at grouping humanity, and that is according to obligations, what each group is obligated to do. So the main groups that people are familiar with are the Gentile nations, who are obligated to keep the 7 Noahide laws, and then you've got the Jewish people who are commanded many more laws, 613 to be exact. And even within the Jewish people, there are specific groups that have more and less obligations. So the way it works is that these obligations are avenues to connect with God. The commandments that apply to different groups, and when people keep the commandments, they connect with God. So the more commandments you have, the more avenues to connect. That doesn't mean that people that have less commandments are lesser on a lesser level. In fact, the Talmud says that a Gentile that learns Torah, that studies Torah, the Torah that applies to the 7 Noahide laws, he is as great as the high priest in the Jewish people, which is the highest level within the Jewish population. So it's not about being higher law, it's about more avenues to connect. Now, with the extra obligations, like if a person is born to a particular group, or he changes, like as we'll soon see, he gets an inherent ability to keep those extra obligations. And with that ability comes expectation and responsibility. So if he doesn't keep those obligations that apply to him, he's actually worse off than he was before with lesser obligations. So if someone doesn't do what he's supposed to do, he is considered in the Talmud even worse than a mosquito, which is the lowest creation that just sucks blood and doesn't even give anything. Now, if a person doesn't keep the obligations, that doesn't mean that that's the end of the story, because it's an external thing. He still has the inherent ability, and therefore he has an opportunity to return, to repent, and to fix up what he's done. And if someone keeps the commandments and he's obligated to do them, then that's considered, he gets a higher reward than someone who's not obligated and keeps them. So for example, a Gentile is allowed to keep all the commandments that a Jew is obligated to keep, except for the studying of Torah on subjects that don't pertain to him, and also observing the Sabbath. So aside from those exceptions, he can keep all the commandments. However, and then also he's going to get a reward for it as well, but the reward that he gets will be less than someone who is obligated to keep them and he keeps them. So now, if someone is not happy with the obligations that he's got, he wants more, he wants to take on more, then he can change. So there's some changes that can happen between those groups. A Gentile can convert and become a full convert, a ger tzedek, and all the obligations that are applicable to Jews will apply to him as well, aside from minor exceptions. So that's something that a person can do if he wants to. Now, there's two other groups between those two that are generally not applicable these days, and we'll soon see why. So the first one is a slave. So if a Gentile is to become a slave to a Jew, then he's also obligated to keep a lot of commandments. In fact, all the commandments aside for the commandments that are time-bound. So, for example, reciting the Shema is something that applies in the morning and in the evening, and because it's time-bound, then he doesn't keep this commandment, and same thing with other commandments like that. And so we'll talk about slavery soon, because it's a whole topic. So we'll just touch on that. And then there's another group called Ger Toshav, a resident convert. And this group is, again, not applicable today, but it's basically a Gentile that decides that he wants to keep the 7 Nochad laws in a formal way in front of a Jewish court. So he becomes a formal Ger Toshav. So that's something that doesn't apply today, but that's the other group that's not so popular today that people don't know about. So we're going to be talking actually about that group in the next video in more detail. Now, as you noticed, there's movements up, in other words, accepting more obligations, but so a Gentile can become all these three, and a resident convert can become a slave, can become a full convert, and same thing with a slave, can become a full convert. It doesn't work the other way around. So when someone accepts more obligations, then he gets an inherent ability to do it. As we said, he gets an additional spiritual element installed, so to speak, in his soul, and therefore he's obligated and he can't go back to how it was before. Now, with this group of Gentiles, we can further subdivide them because it's informal, so we can subdivide them generally into three groups: people that keep the 7 Nochad laws, and people that worship idols. They worship other gods. It's generally referred to by the acronym of Akum, which stands for Oved Kochavim U'Mazalot, someone who serves the star signs. And then you've got a group which seems to be more popular in the later part of history, which is atheism, people that don't believe in God altogether. It's called a min in Hebrew. All right, so again, as we said, the difference between those two groups is just formality. So we'll come back to that in the next video, and we'll also see what this transition looks like between idol worshipping and someone who keeps the 7 Nochad. So that's going to apply in the days of Mashiach. Now, coming back to slavery, slavery is not a nice word. It is associated with a lot of negativity, especially historical, because traditionally it's a loss of human rights. You take a human being who can be free and do what a human can be doing, and you're making him lose his freedom and take on a master that's a lot of time abusive and doesn't treat the slaves nicely. But even without that, it's like it's downgrading a human being, taking him and making him like an animal, basically. So that's not a good thing, and therefore slavery is pretty much not applicable today in any circle of society. However, in the Jewish view, slavery has a big part in that, especially spiritually, because Jews are slaves to God. This is what it says explicitly in the Torah, in Leviticus, Avadai hem, they are my slaves. So that has a big part in Judaism, because every Jew is inherently a slave to God, even though he might not look like it externally, but inherently that's the case. And in fact, this is considered the highest level of serving God, when someone becomes a slave to him. And this is something that is only given to people like Moses and King David. They achieve that level of being a slave, which means that they have no other desires but what the will of God is. And therefore, whatever they do, whatever they say is consistent with how God looks at it. So that's the highest level of service. And also in Jewish law, we find that a slave acquires the identity of his master. And this is something that applies to like we saw with the Jews and God, like you become like God, so to speak. But also with a normal master, if a person is to acquire a slave, or a slave is to be acquired by a master, he becomes like his master. So if his master is higher than him, then he gets an upgrade. And so we find that a slave of a king is considered the king himself. So because he becomes part of the king, he assumes his identity, and therefore it's an upgrade for the human being. So there is some positive elements of slavery. It really depends on who the master is and whether it's done by choice, but there are certainly positive aspects of that. Now, it's not applicable today, as we mentioned, because aside from the fact that why would anyone from the Gentile nations want to become a slave to a nation that's not so popular, not held in such a big esteem before the days of Mashiach and during the times of exile. But aside from that, if a person really wants to be closer to God, he wants more avenues, like we've seen before, he can just convert and assume all these obligations that are applicable to a Jew. So that's much easier, both in this much higher and also easier to do, especially these days. And that's what most people do if they want to assume more obligations. Now, as we'll soon see, this is going to be problematic in the times of Mashiach. So let's see how conversion works in the Messianic age. We're going to start with the Tractate of Yevamot in the Babylonian Talmud, page 24b. So this is what it says over there. Tanu Rabbanan, rabbis taught, En mekablin girim li'imot haMashiach. Converts will not be accepted in the times of Mashiach. Right? So basically, it's too late to convert once Mashiach comes. Kayotzebo, there's also examples of this in the past. Lo kivlu girim lo b'imei David velo b'imei Shlomo. The converts were not accepted neither in the times of King David nor in the times of his son, King Solomon. And we'll soon see why. Amar Rabbi Eliezer says, what is the proof for this? Ma'ikra, there's a supporting verse in Isaiah 54, Hengor yagur efes me'oti migar itach alayich yipol, which basically means that whoever converts in the time when God did not appear to the Jewish people, he is going to reap the reward with them in the Messianic age. But after that, after Mashiach comes, conversion is not applicable. So this is what we see from the Talmud over here, that it's too late to convert. Now we're going to go on to another place in the Talmud, in Avodah Zarah, the Tractate of Avodah Zarah, page in the very beginning, where the Talmud goes on to recount two episodes that will happen when Mashiach comes, which demonstrate the demand to convert. So nations will want to convert, and they'll struggle to do that. So we're going to look at the second episode, because it involves conversion. Rabbi Yossi says like this: Le'atid lavo ba'in ovdei kochavin u'mitgairim. In the future, the other worshipping nations will come and convert. So they will convert. So all of a sudden, there's alarm bells, because we just learned, like we saw, that it's not going to be applicable anymore. So the Talmud asked that question: Umi mekablinan minayu? Are we going to accept those converts? Ve'atanya, because we learned, En mekablin girim li'imot haMashiach kayotze bo lo kiblu girim lo b'imei David ve'lo b'imei Shlomo. Like we just saw, conversion won't be applicable anymore. So how do you say, Rabbi Yossi, that there's going to be conversion with these nations? Ela, so the Talmud answers, Shena'asu gerim grurim. The converts will become what's called gerim grurim. Gurim literally means dragged, but let's see how Rashi explains it. Me'elehen midarim, they convert on their own. Ve'anan lo mekablinan, but we will not accept them. So they will not be accepted, but they'll convert anyway. And we'll still see how that works. However, the Talmud goes on and it says that after they convert, there's going to be a war, Milchemet Gog uMagog, and that's going to test their faith, and they will largely fail the test. They'll be scared, because Gog and Magog is going to come and wage a war against the Jewish people. They'll be scared. They'll run away and go back to how they were before, to being Gentiles, and that's going to prove that the conversion was no good. So we see from this Talmud that Gentiles will convert, even though we said that it's not accepted anymore, and the conversion is for the wrong reason, and therefore we won't accept them. But we'll soon see about this as well. And another thing we see from this Talmud is that this is speaking about the beginning of the days of Mashiach, so there's still wars going on. So it's not fully the days of Mashiach yet. Mashiach has come, but it's not realized fully, and therefore it's the beginning of that period. Now we mentioned that people convert for the wrong reason. Will convert for the wrong reason. So the Meiri, who is another commentator on the Talmud, one of the Rishonim, the early commentators, he explains this Talmud as follows. And firstly, he's analyzing the conversion in the times of King David and King Solomon. So this is what he says: Lo kiblu beidin agadol gerim kol yemei David u'Shlomo. The converts were not accepted then. Shayu choshishin lahem, because the presumption was that they converted for the wrong reason, so therefore they were not accepted. What would be the reason, the ulterior motives in the time of King David and King Solomon? King David, in his time, Shema mipachad milchamotav hayu mitgarim, because converts would want to convert at that time because they were scared from the wars that King David was waging. He was conquering nation after nation around him, and the nations were scared, so they wanted to convert to save themselves. So that's not a good reason to convert, and therefore they were not accepted. Uvimei Shlomo, and in the time of King Solomon, Shema bishvil hakavod ve'hasrara shehayu liYisrael biyamav, because they were suspected to convert for the high esteem and the control that the Jewish people were held at that time. So people wanted to become part of that. Again, an ulterior motive, and therefore they were not accepted. U'mekom makom, he goes on to say, Harbe nidgairu me'elehen. Many converts converted on their own at that time. How did they convert? Al yedei bedin hedyotot, because they grabbed 3 Jews from the street and converted in front of them. It's not an official conversion, but it holds true to Jewish law because they converted in front of officially a bet din, a Jewish court. Vehem shamu alehem gerim gurim. These are the gerim gurim that we mentioned in the Talmud. So what happened to those converts at that time? Vehayu bedin agadol machzikin otam kegerim bechol makom. They were presumed to be gerim. They were not rejected completely. However, ela shelo hayu mekarvin otam kol kach. They did not integrate them into society ad shehiyu ro'im ma sofam, until they see what's going to happen with them at the end. Because when the saying goes, fake it until you make it, that's only if you want to make it. However, if these converts don't want to make it, so the faking can't last forever, and it's going to prove what's going to happen with them at the end. It's going to prove on the beginning that it wasn't for the right reason. So they waited to see what's going to happen with them, and if they converted sincerely, then they were accepted. Okay, so we see from here that the reason why they were not accepted is because of ulterior motives, different periods. But we also see that not everyone was doing it for the wrong reason. And therefore, there was a test applied by the court, basically to wait and see what's going to happen. He goes on to say that the same thing will happen in the days of Mashiach. They will not be accepted in the high court at that time, only after great scrutiny and determining what the real intention was. So in regards to that, we can see that, yes, in the early times of Mashiach, there will be ill intentions, there's going to be a war, there's still going to be people doing things for the wrong reasons. However, in a later time, when the verse that says, the spirit of impurity I should remove from the land, there won't be any more ill intentions, people will do things for the right reasons, and therefore the determining the real intention and scrutiny is not going to be so applicable. So let's see how that works in the next piece of Talmud, which is in further down the same tractate of Avodah Zarah, just in page 24a. So this is what it says there in the Talmud. The Talmud speaks about the verse in Zephaniah that reads like this: כי אז אהפוך אל עמים שפה ורורה לקרוא כולם בשם השם לעובדו שכם אחד. The translation is, for then I will convert the peoples to a pure language, that all of them call in the name of God, to worship him in one Shechem. We haven't translated the word Shechem because it's going to have two different meanings, as we'll soon see. So this is what the Talmud says over there. Kulam gerim, Rabbi Eliezer says, Kulam gerim gurim hem le'atid lavo. Everyone, all the nations will be considered gerim gurim in the future. So we see here already that we're speaking about everyone, not only some people that want to convert, but everyone. All right. Amar Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef brings a supportive verse to this. Ma'ikra. Ki az efoch elamim safa verura v'gomer. He brings the verse that we just mentioned. For then everyone, kulam, will be calling in the name of God. Amar le Abaye. So Abaye asked a question. V'dilma, maybe me'avodat kochavim hu dehadu behu. Maybe it's only from idol worshipping that they're going to repent from. So they're going to stop calling their idols and start calling in the name of God. That doesn't mean that they're going to convert or start keeping any laws. Amar le Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef replied to him, le'ovdo shechem echad ktiv. It says to worship him, le'ovdo. So that is much more than just calling in the name of God. And therefore that proves that they're going to convert. Now, what sort of conversion are we talking about? So Rashi says, Shechem echad. What is this word? Shechem, it means a shoulder. So in other words, everybody is going to shoulder the same yoke of serving God. Mashma, ein chiluk be'ovadav. There's not going to be a difference between those who worship God. Israel ve'haumod, the Jewish people and the nations, tehe abodatan shava b'chol mitzvotav. The service will be equal in all the commandments. So we see that Rashi understands this as a full conversion. Gerim gurim, it's a full conversion, and that's what's going to happen to all the nations. As we'll soon see, it's going to apply a bit later on in the times of Mashiach. We also see that the conversion is going to be for the right reasons. So everybody's calling the name of God, they're not faking it, and they're all serving him with one shoulder in one level. So there's no more faking. It's for the right reasons. And this is supported by another early commentator, one of the Rishonim, not in his commentary on the Talmud, but in his book of sermons that was printed in his name. And this is what he says over there. Ki kol ha'umot yeshuvu le'emunatenu b'chlalei haTorah u'befrateha. All the nations are going to return and serve and abide by the Torah with all its details. B'chol pratehem v'dikdukehen, he says again, with all the fine details. So everything will apply to everyone. And he actually goes on to bring another support to this from a verse in Lamentations, in Eicha, that reads like this: Ma ashaveh lach va'anachamech, which the translation is, what can I liken to you that I may comfort you? So liken, the word liken, ashaveh, also means equal. And the sages comment on this and say in the Midrash, lech she'ashaveh lach anachamech. When I'm going to make you equal, then I will console you. And he goes on to explain that until such time that all the nations and the Jewish people will be on one level, there's always going to be an issue of jealousy, of fear of war, and hatred. And therefore, then when everybody will be equal, then there's going to be a full consolation that there's no worry of war or the hatred from the nations. So we're going to see, so we see from here that everybody is going to be on the same level, equal. And in that sense, it's closing the circle from when it started with the divisions that we've seen before. It's closing the circle. Everybody will be together again, doing the same thing. However, there is another commentary on this Talmud, and this is the Maharsha, who has a different view of this conversion. So his view is that it's not a full conversion. And this is what he says over there, after he says to look at what Rashi says. However, he says, Umihu leshon shechem echad mashma chelek echad. Shechem also means a portion. So when it says to serve God with one shechem, it means to serve him with one portion. Not all the laws will be applicable, but only some of the laws, which means basically the 7 Noachad laws, which they should have kept before, that's when and they haven't, that's when they're going to start keeping again. So everyone will keep the 7 Noachad laws, and in that sense, it's closing the circle for the Gentiles only. They went on the wrong path, they're going to come back and serve God with what they're supposed to do. So let's just summarize what we've seen in this video so far. We've got a spectrum of spiritual identity across humanity, how the Torah defines it in accordance with the obligations that apply to each group. And we saw that in the Messianic Age, there's going to be a push to convert amongst the nation, but the doors will be closed. But nevertheless, some people will climb in, and there's going to be a war that tests them to see if they're sincere or not. But ultimately, everybody will convert, and the conversion still is not clear whether it's going to be a full conversion or only like a resident conversion where they only keep the 7 Noachad laws. So we still need to have a look at how the Jewish law determines the matter, what sort of conversion is going to apply. And also we're going to see how that fits in with the implications to who survives the depopulation threat that we mentioned in the previous video. So until then, so long.